Hey, we are live. All right, we have lost Tanya and Latrish, but we have gained Steph Sherer.
Wow.
So very happy about that, and really looking forward to having this conversation, getting caught up a little bit about with ASA at large and other things going on, but delving into the Schedule 6 project. And Tanya and Latricia have joined us. Other people are going to be jumping on today too. Hopefully Dr. Crocker and a few others, but
Fantastic.
Stacy. And a couple people are going to be at Steve Levenger's funeral today. Brandy, I think Adam too, if I'm not mistaken, and probably many others. But that's a guy that should be recognized early on. He was confronted with the narcotics enforcement team in Oakland County and just growing plants under the law in his house. And he handled them really well, and he still had a huge hassle and stuff, but he was actually used subsequently as an example of how to deal with that stuff. And he fortunately didn't get caught up in the system as other people did, especially in Oakland County, which became a really horrible place and a focus for law enforcement and Sheriff Bouchard and everything over the years. But that guy maintained being an activist and an advocate, and he was an excellent musician and showed up at a lot of events. He was on our show a few times. So we'll check on him a little bit more and maybe hear from Brandy and others and be able to discuss him a little bit more. But I want to at least acknowledge him because he was a big part of the community. And we do this too often these days. Just a reminder to throw Rick some prayers and positive vibes. He's still on the same path, still hanging in there. But he appreciates it, and I think those things are helping him out. And then I wanted to cover the event real quick and just kind of go over a few highlights of that, and that can segue into some of the stuff we're going to delve into with Steph. But Steph, if you don't mind, welcome, and just want to acknowledge you being here and very happy that you have the time for us, and really looking forward to getting into all the things we're going to talk about, Schedule 6 and otherwise. And just thanks for being here, and just want to
appreciate it.
Yeah, good. And of course, video right now she's in a spot where the reception isn't the best, so the video being down makes it a little bit better. That could work out for you guys too, Tanya and Trish. Sometimes if the connection's bad, sometimes just cutting the video would prefer to see it.
I turn into a robot pretty quickly.
There you go. So this event went down called the Legacy event, and it was a licensed cannabis event using metric or commercially licensed companies. But it was also designed around bringing the different components of the cannabis movement together, the original caregiver system and the patients and the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. Oh, there went stuff. And to bring those people together, but also with a lot of information and panel discussions and things like that. And I thought it went really well. There was a couple of criticisms I had on Medical Mondays last night, but they were pretty minor. And I'm sure anything that was noticed in need of help will be caught by the event coordinators and shored up for next time around. And I thought it was great, though. Say it again, Trish.
I said I didn't get to watch it last night. I had a good time. There's they put a lot of work into that. It's really stoked that we had a event to ourselves with everyone to an event where they just left it open to advocates and gave other people an opportunity to use their voice. People that don't advocate but would like to or have something to say. And it was really neat. We were able to reach a lot of young people, talk about harm reduction with cannabis and rehabilitation. And a lot of people like to share their stories and talk about how plant medicine helped them recover and continues to keep on helping them recover. So that was kind of neat. That's really great testimonials. So it really did give us an opportunity to pair ourselves with people who could definitely use the benefits from it. But
Yeah,
have
and
to
you know, in the midst of the commercial system where the actual medical program kind of sucks and it's phasing out because it's not that competitive, and it's going to go away either on its own or legislatively. That's kind of a similar discussion that I was having with Steph about Schedule 6, in that if you don't keep a focus on the medical side of it, we could lose it. Yeah, of course, there'd be still some people, aware of it and doing it, but unless there's a specific focus on it, we lose a lot of the momentum and the research and the access and all the other options or other possibilities that there could be by maintaining a specific focus and keeping it in, very formally in the mix. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper, but it's the same thing. I mean, the medical program's going away here, and people have to take it upon themselves to make sure that component is still a part of, like at Meds Cafe, we do that. We make sure that there are people available to help people with those discussions and go down the path of how they may, look at cannabis use for conditions and things like that, and if they need it. But formally, the medical stuff isn't really as prevalent anymore. As everybody knows, it's not as competitive. It's not used that often, and it's going to go away at some point. So anyway, and the other thing is, when we talked about Steve Lovinger for a minute and the potential raid from Oakland County, reminds me of the older days of ASA and specifically being aware of raids and helping people out in Michigan early on with raid preparedness. And I was talking to Stacy, who may join us later on too today, about that. That was outside of her historical, reference of everything, and she was surprised to learn about how that had to be a focus as opposed to really taking care of important issues, and other things like further on down the line. But anyway, that was a big part of the early days. And I don't know, Steph, if you can talk with a little bit better connection now.
Can you hear me? Is this good?
Yeah. Oh, it sounds really good right now. Yeah. So
great. I won't move.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So fill us in a little bit. I was just, I don't know if you heard me, but like it was the raids thing brought up some of the older days and the really important information. And by the way, ASA is like, I want to say 25 years old now.
21 years old. Yeah. We can drink, but we still can't use our medicine legally.
Okay. Yep. But very, very important organization. The only one and longest lasting / federally focused, and getting into, obviously the states. And so we were associated. And I think everybody here in one way or another at one time has done some formal ASA concentration and stuff. I know that some of the older formations of groups Jim was in, and in the newer one, Latricia's involved in.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
I think, just hearing, just talk about the event and about the experience that patients are having in Michigan. I want you guys to know that you're not alone. That's something that I hear from patients all over the country in states with adult use programs. And I think, for me personally, what I'm always advocating for is actually the experience that I had coming into medical cannabis, which is, my doctor brought up cannabis use to me. I'd never thought about cannabis medically. It wasn't something that I used, and it was around me, but I wasn't a cannabis consumer. I have an intolerance to anti-inflammatories, and I have a disease called dystonia. And in my early 20s, I started having kidney failure because of side effects of anti-inflammatories, which is a very common, by the way, occurrence. If you read the back of your Advil bottle, you're not supposed to take ibuprofen more than 3 days in a row. It's just horrible for your intestines. So, this old man, my neurologist, walked into the room with me one day and closed the door behind him and asked me if I smoked pot. And I told him no. And he asked me if I knew where to get some. And I asked him if I was his youngest patient because I thought he was trying to score weed from me. I had no idea where that conversation was going. And he, once he realized what I was thinking, he said, no, look, I actually don't know much about it at all. I know there was a law passed in '96, that it's some like quasi legal here. I don't know where you can get it, but I have 2 other patients that have an intolerance to anti-inflammatories, and they've been able to manage their symptoms with cannabis. So if you can find it, I think you should try it. And so, I was in my 20s in San Diego. It wasn't that hard to find cannabis. I just called my friends that listen to Wu-Tang and reggae, and I was like, "You smoke weed?" I called a friend of mine who had been complaining about her son. I was like, "Could you just like go through his dresser drawers?" And so I found it, and it worked, and it worked well. I had a political background, and so when I started looking into sort of the political makeup, what was going on, I learned that in California, this law had passed in '96 that was a criminal exemption law, and about 8 of these had passed in the country. And basically, what it meant was if you got arrested with cannabis possession, that you could show a letter to the judge and get your charges dropped, but they could still take your medicine, they could still arrest you. And so, I knew not everyone was a 20 something in San Diego. And I was like, where would my grandmother find cannabis? And so I learned about these underground dispensaries. This was in 2001. There were 11 of them in the Bay Area of California, in the whole country. And the Bush administration was raiding them, was coming down on them. And I realized that these people were committing federal civil disobediences that carried 40 years to life for these infractions, and that if they were willing to do this, I wanted to help create a movement to support that, but also to make sure that the whole world was watching. And so after we started ASA, for every single raid, there was a protest that happened while it was going on. We had, in the old days, phone trees and then text alerts that told everybody there's a raid going on. Everybody had signs in their cars that said DEA, hands off my medicine. We had a media on the phone list, and we had trained everybody that worked in dispensaries and in cultivation sites, how to have a successful law enforcement encounter. We did role plays to teach them to not say anything, choose to remain silent, ask to speak to a lawyer. And so, all of this was then in the public eye, and it did a few things. One, there were definitely a lot more raids over the years, but there were very few prosecutions because people were remaining silent. They weren't giving more information. But I think, those who were wanting to help patients and open these facilities, when they saw, they knew what the legal risks were, but they knew there was a movement behind them. I think that gave people a lot of confidence to go ahead and move forward. And it was really, the fact that the Bush administration and then the Obama administration, they were playing whack-a-mole, and there was just too many of us. Like they just could not. There was no way they had the resources and enforcement to shut it down. And along the way, a byproduct of our advocacy was the creation of this marketplace. And so, we had to create regulations, we had to create product safety standards, we had to do all of those things. But the idea of these sort of centers was really just supposed to be triage to get patients off the battlefield of the war on drugs while we passed federal legislation. And I'll pause there. But that was sort of what, sort of where we came from, and where I feel like a lot of people, like you said, Jamie, that, have no idea of the history of where we came from. They think that, they look around at medical cannabis today and they think this is what we were fighting for. And what they don't understand is that we're not finished. Like we might be on the 10-yard line, which is really frustrating to see people say, "Oh, I'm giving up now." But we're not finished until cannabis is available.
Connection
It's
getting a
covered
little
by
bit.
insurance,
There it
because
is.
right now,
A little choppy, unfortunately.
is that
I think he must have moved like a centimeter over or something like that. Man. All right, we'll get the connection back. We know.
Better?
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Yes.
It's okay.
Perfect.
Sit on my hands. Is that better? So I was just going to say, unless we change the name of our organization to Privileged Americans for Safe Access, we got a lot of work to do.
Man, it's so important, this organization, and it does get lost really easily. And that made a lot of sense to me when we were talking a little bit about the Schedule 6 stuff before. I do want to rag on them. There's a company in Michigan called Loom, not a big favorite of most of this, longtime community, let's say, or and they're in all their stores. And the CEO of my company, Josh Cover, is particularly annoyed and irritated by this. You walk in there, I think it's in all of them, and it says something to the effect like, and just like overnight, this became $1 billion industry. It's kind of an affront to all of the severe issues with, drug war issues and people's healthcare not being paid attention to and all that kind of stuff. And just so naive and ignorant. It's very irritating. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that has gone on.
Yeah, no, I feel that. And I think, as the marketplace started referring to itself as an industry, I feel like there was this group of white dudes that basically, took credit for everything every advocate ever did and started talking about themselves as the industry. The truth is that cannabis is a commodity. It is a market. It should be part of other industries. And the protectionism that we're seeing of, these little pieces is actually keeping cannabis from being able to evolve into other industries, including healthcare.
Right on. And Rick Ansis and Robert Root here watching. These are the guys that, amidst others, who put on this event this last weekend and are interested in making sure that the focus on medical stays alive within the commercial industry. So I'm sure they're interested in what you have to say. And we brought it up a little bit during our discussions and things like that at the event, but this is an ongoing discussion. So definitely interested in more things about ASA, more things about, some of the stuff that you're working on. And we might have Dr. Crocker joining us possibly in a little bit. But I am really interested in...
I think I saw him. I saw an email, Jamie, from him, and he said that he was traveling and wasn't going to be able to make it.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that. I just texted him too, saying, "Hey, come on." All right. So he's probably not coming on, but we still have a couple other people that may be coming on to join in on the conversation. But I'm interested to get into it a little bit more and just learn more about it. There's a couple times we brought it up here without me having more information. I've been able to speak with Brandy. I've been able to speak with you. You've sent me information, and I have a better feel for it. And I was saying some things that I thought might be the case earlier on before I knew. I remain a little skeptical, but such as this is a very practical move. There's incremental gain to be had here. So although not ideal in some ways, it's really important to look at this and try to take advantage of it if possible, and those types of things. And as I learn more about it, this is starting to grow on me. And some of the ideal things I still kind of agree with, but it's plain to see the advancement we could make if something like this were really able to go down. And so I'm starting to lean in this direction and see the practicality of it. And I know from what Brandy's experience was in Washington, D.C., and maybe the same with others, was that the lawmakers were open to this partially based upon the fact that cannabis would stay on the schedule, and staying on the schedule, even though a new definition and even though a new number furthest on down the list does rub some people the wrong way. But right in the information about this, there's some preemptive discussions about that. And I thought it was really, really thoughtful information and very informative. So if you don't mind, give us a little background and let us know what you think. I can guide it along a little bit. But I know that there's a little bit of foundation here to give people, and I think more people should know about it and not be turned off by the fact that it remains on the schedule, which I think is a crux of a lot of the criticism.
I think that that a lot of people haven't even thought about it, actually. And there is actually another organization out there that's been talking about Schedule 6 in the way that actually it stays on Schedule 1 and it's on Schedule 6, sort of like what we see at the UN. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a new schedule being totally created for cannabis and cannabinoids that would be Schedule 6. And so let me just back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about sort of where this concept came from. At Americans for Safe Access, we've worked in every state on the medical cannabis program. If people want to learn more about our organization, you can see us at safeaccessnow.org. Every year we put out a State of the States report where we grade each of the states and try to create guidelines for elected officials to improve those laws. But the reality is that we've kind of stalled out. But we also, as we were working in this, in the states, creating these programs, we are also working on removing some other barriers at the federal level that were keeping, the possibility of a federal medical cannabis program, not a possibility. And one of those was the scheduling at the UN. So, people may not know this, but, the United States was actually pushed and helped create this drug treaty, a UN drug treaty that also has a scheduling of cannabis and has cannabis scheduled in a category that did not recognize its medical value. And, Americans for Safe Access began working on and chipping away at changing that scheduling. To be honest, I never thought we would change the schedule at the UN level before we changed the schedule in the US, but there you have it. But in 2020, the UN changed that schedule and actually, now recognizes its medical use. And why that's significant is that a lot of sort of drug policy hardliners in DC so that we could, there was no way we could change our policies because we would be out of step with that drug treaty. Well, now the United States is out of step with that drug treaty because we do not recognize the medical benefit. So that was a big hurdle. We also challenged misinformation at the DEA about cannabis being a gateway drug, about it causing psychosis. And we're successful in making the DEA remove that information from their website and publications. And when I first started working in DC in 2002, a lot of politicians said that, medical cannabis was just an experiment in a couple liberal states. And so I think we've shown now that that this is not just a little California project. So in that way, we've really sort of moved a lot of those hurdles. We also, partnered with the American Herbal Products Association and the American.
Hang on, Steph. Yeah, you're on mute, James.
Reiterating, weaving in and out. If you can hear me, Steph.
Yeah. Can't hear you, Steph.
We do have Stacy, who I referenced before, now jumping in. Steph will find a connection here in a second, I'm sure. And I got the sense she was traveling a little bit when I talked to her, and probably find some areas that aren't like near a great reception. So I'm sure we're dealing with a little bit of that.
It was great that she got the ASA got some of that information from the DEA's website removed. That's some really good progress.
They've done some really cool shit. There's some court scenarios with the DEA and scheduling that they pushed, and that they got a lot of great stuff on record. Wasn't ultimately successful, obviously, but did a great job of educating a lot of people and getting the issue out in the open. And it's weird because it just didn't happen just because it was cannabis. We didn't get into it yet, and then when she comes back, hopefully we will. But there was a directive from President Bush to look into descheduling. He told the DOJ, which they can do, to offer a recommendation. They then enlisted the help of whatever the federal health department is, Health Human Services, maybe. Here's Steph again. Hey, Steph. Oh, come on.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Man, I heard you say, "Can you hear me?" And then right after, it bounced again. Man.
Hear me?
Yes, I heard that. I can hear that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Come on. Oh, shit. It's like Stacy's having a hard time too. This is this particular streaming thing does demand a little bit more than like Zoom or something like that. So that's kind of part of it. But man, it's such good info here. I hope we bring it together. But there were some things that came out, like the recommendations coming up, and then DOJ says, yeah, well, we're working with Human Health Services, and Human Health Services, yes, we're looking at stuff, but if there's a final determination, it's going to be on the DOJ and all this kind of stuff, and we might do this recommendation in part based upon getting feedback from the public. It's supposed to be a scientific evaluation. Public opinion should not matter at all. But it makes me think that there's nothing against it that they found, that there's no reason to stay on the list that they were able to come up with. And so it just has never made any sense. As people know, it was artificially placed on the list without any scientific foundation by Nixon. He admitted it. You can hear it on the tapes. And he had a commission. What was it? The Sherer Commission? Warrant Commission? And they came back and said, yeah, it's, cannabis is kind of like aspirin, I guess, it would be, equatable to aspirin or something like that. But he, for the purposes of social control, put it as a Schedule 1. All right, Steph, this has got to be it. That sucks. We're going to get it, though.
We will.
But then one of the most recent things I heard was like, oh, we might have something going on that, like by the end of the year. So there must not be any confirmation that it's, reasonable or appropriate for it to stay there. Otherwise, that would already be known. That would already be out there. And maybe we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, really. But yeah, the more people.
It's just amazing something hasn't been done about it already. Like there just hasn't been our lawmakers, we have to wait for all this process to go through. And it's just, it's been around for such a long time. It's part of it has been. It's so frustrating.
It is. And we've seen how that plays out here. Like many of us here have been paying attention or involved for many, many, many years. And you see how slow things work. And Steph can attest to like the federal version of that.
We're behind the UN. Come on.
And we can usually force our stupid policies on the UN in this regard, and then thus into other countries.
Yeah, there's actually 65 countries now with medical cannabis programs.
Awesome. We can hear you clearly. Thank you.
That's great.
Fantastic.
Great stuff too.
So keep going, please, while we got a connection.
Okay, good. So, so I think, what what we've also been doing is actually helping other countries create medical cannabis programs. And as I mentioned, there are 65. These programs are federal programs. They're not state by state. And a lot of times, people from the United States say, "Oh, well, they're really hard for patients to get into, so they don't have a variety, so they must not be great programs." But the reality of a lot of these other programs, like in Europe, is that they're medical programs, and they include a prescription from a doctor. They include, a patient goes to a pharmacy and actually gets a product with the cannabinoid content that the doctor has prescribed. And so, a patient isn't like looking at names like Maui Wowie or, green crack. They're given sometimes flour, sometimes a tincture, sometimes pills, based on what the doctor has prescribed. And it's covered by insurance in a lot of these countries. And so, what we're starting to see is doctors actually, prescribing cannabis as a frontline treatment. So instead of waiting, like my experience, for my kidneys to start failing, for a doctor to bring up cannabis as an option for a chronic condition, they're actually bringing it up at diagnosis. If you're going to have inflammation for the rest of your life, cannabis is a very safe anti-inflammatory. So, looking at things that have worked and haven't worked in all of these various countries, we've started working on legislation that would, build off what we've learned in the States, make sure that we're not interrupting the current access, with the current problems that we have, but create an avenue for a truly medical program. And so the legislation that we are working on getting introduced this year would include two things. One would be the creation of an Office of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoid Control, which is actually what we have in almost every country that has a medical cannabis law. Right now, the National Institute of Drug Abuse is the designated agency that deals with cannabis, so not very good for us. So this new office would actually sort of take over and help, redefine what all agencies do around cannabis. And, instead of, agencies that have nothing, no idea how to handle cannabis, this agency would help them figure that out. Everything from, the Department of Agriculture to NIH. And then it would also create a new schedule for cannabis, Schedule 6, that would actually be overseen by the Office of Medical Cannabis and not the DEA. When the law would be first passed, it would do a few things. One is immediately anyone who is participating in the medical cannabis marketplace, or any patient, they now would have federal rights. And so it would create a national market for people that are creating medical cannabis products.
So wouldn't it make it allowable in every state for doctors to prescribe it?
It would eventually.
Okay.
Yes, it would eventually. So that there's sort of a ramp up, right? Because the for the existing licenses, they would actually get Schedule 6 licenses, and then pharmacies anywhere would be able to also apply for Schedule 6 licenses to be able to distribute cannabis. And while a state like Indiana may not want to create licenses for cultivation and manufacturing, they won't have to. Cannabis would be able to be imported into pharmacies in Indiana, and a patient would get a prescription from their doctor and go to a pharmacy that has a Schedule 6 license and get it.
And meanwhile, under this plan, it does come off Schedule 1, which is the other component that was of concern. It's unfortunate there is another plan that would keep it like that. But those two things, I think, are really strong.
I think everyone should know that cannabis is going to be the schedule of cannabis is going to change within the next 2 years. Like, that is actually 100% happening. President Biden last year called on HHS and the Department of Justice to look at the scheduling. And I'll tell you, I've been in contact with the folks at the FDA that are working on the scheduling petition. And, they are, or sorry, the scheduling response, it's not a petition. And they are, really diving in and doing their work.
And they're not finding any reason to keep it as a Schedule 1, presumably, and so they feel weird about it. And maybe the Schedule 6 becomes part of the negotiation that makes everybody feel better.
Yeah, I think that to be clear, I think that, not only does the Schedule 1 feel forced, and that was really kind of pushed more by the DEA, but it also, the instructions from Biden were that it does not belong in Schedule 1. Right. And so I think that what the challenge for the folks at FDA, HHS, is that they are confined by the 8-factor analysis and the current existing schedules for their finding. And so I have been optimistic. They've actually reached out to Americans for Safe Access for data. They're really looking at what I've been supplying them is basically different ways to interpret the 8-factor analysis and the criteria for accepted medical use in the United States. But they are, again, confined by those 5 schedules, and they have no intention in descheduling cannabis, and neither does the Biden administration. So I just want to be clear.
It's just too fast for them. They can't conceive of it, even though you can't logically support that. They can't conceive of just taking it off. So this is the compromise, kind of could make everything.
Right. I mean, the Schedule 6 is I want to be clear that is a proposal from Americans for Safe Access, and the only way that the scheduling process could end up with cannabis in a Schedule 6 is if we get this legislation introduced, and it's part of the conversation where the FDA is sort of responding to that, and we pass legislation. So I think on the counter side of if we don't do this, is that cannabis will likely be in Schedule 2 or 3. And
it has its own set of issues, each one. So we bypass a lot of stuff even though that is lowering the schedule, this is still a lot better.
Yes. And so I think what's also key is that, it's medical cannabis has not been allowed to evolve in the United States, right? The people often refer to, compassionate use programs, and I'm not sure if everyone really understands what that means. So compassionate use, when that's used in medicine, it basically means that it's better than anything else that's out there, or they're going to die anyway, so you might as well let them try it, right? And so, for doctors, compassionate use, basically means that they haven't, there's not a drug that will work for them. And so, in that context, and I think, even, for individual patients, they're so excited when they finally have access to cannabis that they don't even know, what they should be demanding. We just put out a report last week at Americans for Safe Access called Regulating Health, where we did a sort of deep dive into the disparities in all of the testing programs in each of the states, and showed that, many states are not, are not testing for heavy metals. They're not testing for, things that really have serious health impacts for patients. And I think what's even scarier is that a patient, if you're using a contaminated cannabis product, you might not even, make a connection that symptom is from the cannabis. And I think also, patients don't know that they, should be demanding for standardized products. People keep, always say, well, won't the adult use market just take care of the medical patients? And the reality is that, and we've seen this in every state, the adult use market, those consumers, they want something different from cannabis than patients. Patients don't want to go on a joyride every time they try a medication, right? Patients want to have the same thing every time. When they find something that works, they don't want to get up in the morning and have to call in sick to work because the product that they got was mislabeled. And I think another thing that people don't really think about for patients is that, this right now, this is all out of pocket cost. And we think about, the fact, a lot of people think about the doctor's visit, maybe the ID card. But what the other expense that people don't really think about is that patients have to buy like 5 or 6 things when they go to a retail supplier to try a few different things to see what works. And then when they find something, the likelihood that that's going to be in stock again means that the next time they go, they have to do the same thing each time. And, because there is no one regulating the laboratories, patients can't trust labels either. So, I think that, that's one sort of just the actual like quality and consistency and standardization of medicine is something that hasn't been able to evolve because you have, and I get it. Look, I say this to elected officials all the time in DC that tell me that, that this has all been a wolf in sheep clothing because, all of these businesses are now, jumping into the rec market. And what I always tell them is, it is really hard to keep a business open with a geo-fenced market. And imagine if at the beginning of the pandemic, if the US government would have asked pharmaceutical companies to create a vaccine for Rhode Island, right? Like how many companies would have stepped up to do that? It's just that it doesn't make financial sense. So when adult use comes on, these businesses are thinking about making payroll, keeping people employed. And so I don't want to, and I definitely have gone through phases where I get very frustrated with the marketplace. But the reality is that unless there's a national market where these businesses could be looking at a market of 6 million legal patients, that we're going to actually have companies competing to create great standardized products and actually invest in efficacy R&D. It just is, it's just not going to happen in this market. And so under the Office of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoid Control, another thing that one of the departments does is actually create what's called a research priority map. So right now, NIH is offering funds for cannabis research, but they're sort of small chunks, and because people aren't organizing this research, they're all sort of having to pay for the same obstacles. And so if we actually could create a research priority map and then give that to NIH to fund, then we're actually going to see cannabis research that's going to move down the line of product development. Another thing that the agency is allowed to do, the office is allowed to do, is do public-private partnerships. So, partner with businesses that want to create standardized products for patients. So I'll pause there and see if you have any questions of what I was just talking about, and I can jump back in.
Does anybody want to chime in here? Trish, formally.
It's a lot to absorb, actually, because I usually work more on, or discover more on the state level instead of the federal level. So I'm just absorbing more than anything.
I think I in terms of a lot of some of the stuff you were pointing to, Steph, the concept that the federal, or not the federal, the medical focus kind of goes away in the midst of these, changes in law, or possibly just descheduling and then not having any other, reference or particular regulation or any control over it, and that kind of stuff. I at our place, I might be kind of a bias. At our place, it's always been a focus. Understanding this, even though they call it medical, this program really kind of sucks. It was made by a really conservative legislature with the idea of just benefiting a few people, really. And so we've had to fight a lot to make it even a little bit functional. And the adult use program is a lot more functional and even helps out, I think, patients more than the commercial one. And so those who take it upon themselves to create, a niche that accommodates for those people looking for a health and wellness approach, or, to address a medical condition or something like that, would just be good business at that point. But I'm a lot more concerned too, based on some of the stuff that you're saying too, that would get lost in the mix.
Yeah, I think that I say this a lot, the first part of the battle for medical cannabis was a legal fight. It was about law enforcement. It was about the, overcoming, societal barriers around cannabis. It was about, fighting with prison guards unions and prosecutors. And, the next battle, which is honestly, it's a different landscape and maybe even a harder battle, is looking at the definition of medicine in the United States. And I think one of the things that I want to be clear, with the proposal that we're talking about of creating the Office of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoid Control, and creating a pathway for a federal medical cannabis program, this does not disrupt the adult use component, right? Like, adult use is going to, stay where it is. I think eventually ATF will probably regulate the adult use market, just like, because there are so many specifics around the state regulations. But I think that, what I don't want to see is everyone think that wellness, equals medicine. And, in this country, physicians are not required to take nutrition courses. Doctors do not tell their patients about dietary supplements, right? They're not educated on these topics. And so, while the wellness industry is this huge industry, it's really, for a privileged class of people that, have, found out about it through a friend and can afford the out-of-pocket costs of implementing these things in their lives. I mean, if you can't afford turmeric or a massage, how are you going to afford medical cannabis? And I think that, I'm not saying that there isn't a wellness element to cannabis. I think that, that there's going to be we're going to see a lot around, cannabis supplements for longevity and cell health and all of those things. But when we talk about the definition of medicine, I want to talk about opening up a place where physicians are educated in med school about the endocannabinoid system, about these products, that that they can bring this up to their patient at diagnosis if this is a good medicine for them, and that we've got companies striving to create standardized products that that doctors and patients can depend on. Now, one other thing I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about the pharmaceuticalization of cannabis. That is something.
Yeah, it wouldn't be
different.
FDA requirements, right? That wouldn't have to go through that type of scrutiny.
Yeah, and that can still happen, right? And
but that can still happen if people, need to, crunch down components into certain things, or whatever. That's fine. That kind of research probably should happen anyway. But that would not alter any of this.
Yeah. So, but I want to be clear, and I think that this is something that we don't talk about enough, which is, some of the elements of creating a pharmaceutical in the in this country. There's some positive things, right, about that. One is, most companies spend the majority of the funds to create a new drug on proving the safety profile. With cannabis and other herbal products, because of the use of thousands of years, we know that, in its, as long as it's in its plant form, that it's safe. Once you start pulling out and creating synthetic cannabinoids, that's another whole other topic, right? So, but unlike pharmaceuticals, cannabis, as well as other herbal medicines, have multiple compounds that create the medical benefit, and so it doesn't fit into the FDA model of pharmaceuticalization. And so the model that we that we want to see is, if you standardize products, then a doctor can still write a prescription that is, equal THC CBD, equal THC CBD CBN, right? If these products are are standardized, that you're actually creating products that still are plant based, but that are have evidence behind them. And so a clinic doing clinical trials, you have to have a standardized product, right? And I think this is something that frustrates researchers in the United States, and why we see a lot of what's called observational research in the United States, is that if there isn't a standardized product that everyone is taking, then the actual clinical trial is a challenge. But you can do clinical trials with multi-compound substances as long as they're standardized. And what I want to see, and what we want to see, is that there is a new pathway under the definition of medicine in this country that includes herbal medicines. And the way, and I think cannabis can be the gateway for that process, so that we're not just seeing privileged individuals having access to these great medicines. And the truth is, 80% of all pharmaceuticals are actually based on a plant on a plant compound. And so and I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories around that, around patenting. But the truth is, though, at the beginning of the 19th century, when people started going to rainforests and finding these herbs, it wasn't reliable to have to keep getting the plant and bringing it back. And so synthesizing the compounds was cheaper, was easier to be able to work with that material. But also, the research tools we had at that time were really blunt, and we really couldn't understand more than putting one compound into a human at a time to see what would happen. Today, we have all sorts of new technologies, metabolome technologies, that will allow us to see something much more complex. And then, as we've moved down, obviously, you see the patenting and all of those components. And it's, last year, Congress and the Senate passed a cannabis research bill that actually Biden signed, that a lot of people say, didn't do anything. It did one really important thing that I think a lot of people missed, which it absolutely gave physicians the right to talk to their patients about cannabis outside of just the First Amendment. So it solidified that protection for physicians. But it also kind of set up this pathway that nobody is going to follow. And what I mean by that is that pharmaceutical companies do not want to develop cannabis products. And, we look at GW Pharmaceutical, that has not made money off of their products. Part of that is because of the efficacy, because it's because of the formulation. It's sort of, as we know with cannabis, one size doesn't fit all. And so, doctors and patients are having a challenging time using it. It's not covered by insurance. It's very expensive. And so a lot of pharmaceutical companies kind of see that as like, the bird and the canary. the canary in the coal mine. I hope there's not a bird in the canary. But the the other thing that we're seeing across the globe is that it's actually generic distributors that are doing most of the research on cannabis, right? And for efficacy. And the reason is that they're the ones that are working with the various suppliers and brokering, getting those products into pharmacies. The more conditions that a doctor writes a prescription for cannabis, the more money they're making, right? And so these generic distributors are actually where we're seeing the largest investment in efficacy research. Right now in Israel, cannabis is the most prescribed medicine in the country.
Wow.
And that is partly due to the investment that these generic distributors have put into efficacy research, that they're, then saying, so that in the United States, when we talk about the 6 million legal patients, they represent about 165 different conditions across the states that are allowed medical cannabis. And so what these generic distributors are doing are really like honing in on each of those conditions and really looking at what the efficacy is and proving it, and then taking that to doctors and saying, hey, this does work for Crohn's disease, this does work for inflammation, for chronic pain. And so what we really have to think about when we want to see medical cannabis evolve in the United States is that, if we look at the current FDA model, we're going to see a square peg in a round hole. And so we've got to create a new pathway. And I believe that the legislation that we're talking about does that. It doesn't interrupt the current access. It creates a pathway to move this forward. And and it also, for those who want to just get their cannabis from an adult use market, they can still do that. Like, they don't, like, if this doesn't interrupt what those current markets. But I feel like something people often, it's very interesting within medical cannabis advocacy is that people often, it's like once they get through the door and they have their access or they have their needs met, they forget to hold the door open for everyone else. And I want to remind people that the state-by-state model leaves out, veterans, government workers, people living in hospice, this huge list of people. And then, of course, people that can't afford it. And it also leaves out this hidden group of people that people don't often think about, which are people that would never think about cannabis as an option, right? And that class of people need to have a voice. And I'm, obviously I mentioned earlier in the show that I'm biased because that's me. I never would have thought about cannabis. But think about, all of the people in your family that, even with cannabis being legal at the state level, unless their doctor talks to them about it, they're not going to try it. And we know about, all of the other side effects that various medications have. And, I think there's another class of people that are maybe experimenting with medical cannabis outside of their doctor's care, which, is also a little dangerous. There are side effects of medical cannabis. Patients should need to tell their doctors if they're going into surgery that they've used cannabis. Cannabis is a blood thinner. It is very dangerous for a patient to go into surgery without letting their surgeon and their physician know that they've been using cannabis. So I I think that for all of those people who have made it through the door, I encourage you to turn around and look outside the door and look at all of the people that are left outside. And if we don't do something, I think that, the future will look like, big alcohol taking over the adult use component. We're already starting to see, behind the scenes, them advocating for THC limits, really to make things look more like what they're used to with alcohol. And then, other use just going into a wellness.
Come back. Oh, come on. That was a nice stretch. We'll get it back.
That was a nice stretch. I was going to say, just thinking about, like, if they take away the medical program in the state of Michigan anyway, or anywhere for that matter, it would be great to still offer like some card for people that want to get it and go to a dispensary and still get a discount. Just
well, you just keep the regular MMA program in place. Just keep it. Just make sure you don't peel it back, and that's always.
I think
available.
that's a good idea. The card is free.
Yeah.
To make the cards free.
Free. Exactly.
Right. Good. Yep. Really good. So, Steph, I don't know if you can hear, but like the herbal pharmacopoeia, if I'm saying that right, now has cannabis. Oops. Okay. So ASA was instrumental in getting the return of cannabis to be on the herbal pharmacopoeia list. If I'm saying that correctly, hopefully Steph comes back and really talks about it. And that really defines it, as plant medicine. And it's commonly the synergistic, all the components of the plant. That's how it works. Steph, are you there? Come on.
You are on mute.
Okay, it's muted.
So when I was in DC, where I met Steph. Oh, there's Steph. You there, girl?
Hi. Yeah.
All right, there we go.
Never mind.
No, please go ahead, Susie, please.
You have to unmute now, Stacey.
Sorry. No, I was going to whip out the fact that you told us in DC, Steph, that I can't remember how many years ago, but like there was 173 plants that were like on the pharmacopoeia, and now it's down to 3. Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, a lot of cannabis advocates. Am I still there? Cannabis advocates.
A little bit.
Quote.
Choppy.
Let me try to move my head.
Well, that's it right there. Oh,
We lost her.
all right. She's going to keep on working with it, and we'll get her back. But I guess so. That is one thing people should know, that ASA was instrumental in doing that. And I wonder, since that is the case, and it is really formally defined as plant medicine in that regard, how that works with the evaluation of medicine, as she was discussing. The criteria. There she is. This is teed up to work. You can tell.
Can you guys hear me?
Perfectly. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I will not move. Unfortunately, I'm in a weird position. Just kidding. But yes, a lot of cannabis advocates talk about cannabis being removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in the 1940s, and what they don't often quote or maybe even know is that cannabis was one of hundreds of herbal compounds that were removed during that time from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. And if folks want to learn more about that history, we have on our website, we have a section called Way Back Wednesday, where we present,
I'll say it's very cool. There is the history of the scheduling. There's all types of really interesting, kind of good information there. If she comes back on. And that's at this website that's on scroll right there. There's can find the menu and all those different areas of the site. That's the main site. All right, we're still going to work on getting that, connection back. And we will. You know what can happen. But anyway, we got the gist of Schedule 6, and even also on this site where you can get a breakdown of it and where it comes from, along with all the other historical background and everything like that we were just discussing. It comes forward and discusses the scheduling issue and understanding that people don't like to see it on the schedule. That's a stumbling block. And it is different. And then the ground that it covers for just keeping it on there from a practical perspective just makes a lot of sense. Doctors can then be involved in letting patients know about this in every state. And over time, there could be stores, even in the most restrictive states, that make it available to those who doctors say they could benefit from it. That automatically bypasses all the issues of their state government and everything deciding whether or not to do something. That's better than nothing. Those are some of the people that don't have a voice, as she was saying. I think that's a really good part, and the fact that it wouldn't interrupt at all with moving forward with just people's right as adults to use cannabis as they see fit.
I'm interested to know what the timeline is for something like that. If they do say, okay, we're going to make it Schedule 6, is it the DEA?
Well,
DEA
yeah. So
at that point, or do they have to
yeah. Well, okay. So if they,
Yes.
she acknowledged, the directive from Biden. I may have referred to him as Bush earlier, but anyways, that we were talking about, and believes that through that, probably in the next 2 years or so, there will be a rescheduling, but they won't take it off. And so that if this is there as an option, then it would solve it from having to go to 2 or 3 or something else they have to deal with. This kind of bypasses a lot of issues, and it makes them and potentially lawmakers, if they were going to weigh in, or if Congress was going to look at this issue, that's the other group that could change scheduling, would feel comfortable about it. So it seems to be a practical, positive, incremental move. Ideally, cannabis doesn't belong on a controlled substances list, but that's politics in part. I think right off the bat, just saying, yeah, it's kind of, it's just a way to appease it, starting off a conversation about that preemptively, just eliminating, yes, it's on the schedule, but it's got a completely different definition, so it doesn't lend itself to the same issues. But go ahead, Jim, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was going to say that she had mentioned other herbs and plants that were taken or put on this list back in the 1940 or whatever, and that would be an interesting list to have. She was about to tell us about something like Way Back Wednesdays.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that too. I think pharma. Well, first of all, yeah, that information is really cool. I've seen it. Here she is again. Yeah. And I think pharma has something to do with that. They, the more of those things that aren't readily available or easily available as a plant, ultimately the better for them in that regard. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Steph, come on, are you there? Can kind of hear you, still choppy.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to move around a little bit. Yeah.
That's it right there. Yep.
Okay. Please. I'm on my tiptoes. Sorry about that. So I think what I was saying when I got cut off is that if people want to learn more about the history of other herbal medicines, there's a section on our website called Way Back Wednesday, and one of them is the history of herbal medicines in the United States that goes into detail, sort of the fight that those medicines have had to go through over the years as well.
Yeah, so Richard Farr just said they limit potency. He said, yeah, that's one of the concerns that you had concerning medical cannabis. It would get out of control, people not knowing what they're doing would start trying to quantify it similar to other things inappropriately, and you would get weird limits on things that don't make any sense. He's trying to bypass that issue specifically. And again, this doesn't interfere at all with the other programs the states have, like as Michigan, where you could just go to the store at 21 or just grow for yourself or get it from a friend. It doesn't interfere with any of that. It's just for this particular scenario.
That's right. And I think, one of the things that would be exciting is actually all labs could apply for Schedule 6 licenses. And something that really, another thing that really concerns me is that even patients that are cultivating, they may not be aware of contaminants naturally occurring in cannabis, right? So, because cannabis is a bioaccumulator, it will pull any metal out of soil or water that is during cultivation. They can have severe health impacts because of the water content, mold, mildews. And so I would love to see the day that patients that cultivate for themselves can bring their cannabis into the lab and have it tested for contaminants.
Yeah.
As well as potency and other cannabinoids. So
people do that here.
People are interested in learning more about the contaminants and the programs. We're actually having a webinar tomorrow at 3 Eastern. You can go onto our website and register. Just regulating patient health, where we're going to dive into the items in that report and have some public health research and physicians to talk about those impacts of contaminants. So yeah, I think that there's what and what you mentioned earlier, Jamie, about
we will resume. So far, we've been able to every time, and it is really interesting.
What was it that you were saying, Jimmy, that she was alluding to?
I said many very profound, important things here today, so it's hard to know exactly which one she's going to focus on. It's be a cliffhanger for when she comes back. But as you said, Stacy, you were there, and here she is. All right, Steph. She'll come on here. Everything just has to line up and kind of connect. Yes.
Yeah, this program is taking a lot of bandwidth. And every time I get a text or something on my phone, it throws me off. So I apologize.
Yeah, sorry. We can kind of hear you right now.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. It was just kind of choppy, but we could hear you.
Okay, good. So, what I'm hoping people, if you're interested in this legislation, you can find a copy of it on our website under campaigns, under the Safe Access for All campaign. You can dive into the legislative text. We have a one-pager that you can use for talking points when talking to elected officials, and there's a presentation that is a deep dive into all of the elements of that legislation. And the other thing that I wanted to let people know is that we are going, the event, Jamie, that you had mentioned that Stacey had mentioned that we did in DC, the ASA Advocacy Academy, we're going to be doing in Detroit on October 14th, which is a Saturday. It's a full day of workshops where we're going to be talking about federal legislation to local and state that we
So close.
Yeah. So close. I can really tell, except for
There it is.
you guys saying when it's working or not.
Yeah, it's like it's so on the line that you can hear what you're saying. That sometimes it gets choppy. You can still tell, but then sometimes it goes off. Just such on the line. It's better at times. We'll
Yeah,
get there. There it is, right there. Oh. A couple times it sounded good right before it went off, but maybe reconnecting will help out. But she was talking about the advocacy clinic or seminar.
Yeah, the Academy.
The Academy. Advocacy Academy.
Academy, exactly. So
Yeah.
that was the one that myself, Cass, and Brandy went to back in May. So she's doing the same thing. It was originally, when I was on the show, I think it was last week, we were originally going to do it next weekend, or I'm sorry, this weekend, but it's just a little bit too soon, and we want to be able to raise some funds and, make this trip worthwhile. So she's going to be here the end of October.
October 14th, Saturday.
17th, I believe.
Okay. I heard 14th. I didn't.
Okay, I'm
consult
going
the
to double
calendar.
check.
But we can tell by what the Saturday is.
The 14th is what I heard.
Yeah, she said it was a Saturday, July, whatever. October Saturday 14th.
All right.
14th, baby.
All day. You come out of it knowing how to be a better, more effective advocate.
From 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., I believe.
I'm down.
Me too.
I'll be there.
So yeah, like,
Jim, I think you're going to be busy that day, but we'll let you know what happens.
In October? No.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Thanks. Yeah, maybe. We'll find something else to do.
But I think Steph's still trying to get the connection, and we will turn it over as soon as she does. But so Stacy, you did that. Then you actually did go to Washington, D.C. and be part of a meeting with lawmakers and their staff and everything, and you applied what you learned.
Yeah, absolutely. It was 2 very, very full days of it definitely went past 6 p.m. and definitely started a little bit before 10. But it was a great crash course. And we got to really get a little bit creative as well with doing some doing some exercises that kind of took us out of our realm of like what we would want to see, and compared to what we're seeing in reality as far as how cannabis is portrayed in the news, right? We were kind of coming up with, some of our fantasy headlines, which led to conversations about what we can do to get those things to happen. Steph, right?
She's saying right, for sure. She hears you.
She's shaking her head. Yeah, I'm sure she's saying yes. But no, it was a really invaluable experience. And then being able to take that, that 48 hours worth of knowledge and, bonding as well. Cause I was lucky enough to stay at the ASA house and, really got to, talk with people that have been with ASA for many, many years, a lot longer than I certainly have. So, it culminated in DC, on Capitol Hill, being able to have a meeting with Gary Peters and then, going around and knocking on doors and having conversations with, staffers. And it really instilled an extra level of confidence when going in there. I definitely felt like I knew what I was talking about. And it was, again, invaluable. I really hope that she's able to do it in several other areas around the state besides Detroit.
Yeah, to find those areas to support that, and it would benefit from it. Certainly West Side State's got a couple pockets there that would be good. Maybe one spot up north, cover a lot of ground. That'd be great.
A triangle, right? Hit each point of the triangle,
Yeah. I would agree. And we've had a couple of good visits, Steph, over the years here. Learned a lot. Not, we brought it up before you came on, Stacey. I'm not sure if you caught it, but we were talking about, as I mentioned to you earlier, years ago when raid preparedness was one of the focuses of ASA, because so many places were just getting raided and stuff.
Yeah, I had no idea that A, that was a thing. B, Steph taught it. C, shit. I mean, like that would have been great to have that, 5 years ago. But what a great, unfortunate, albeit tool to have and resource to have when there's something so ridiculous going on as these raids, which are just shitty and traumatic, and they kind of never leave you. I'm glad that it's not needed anymore. But
we've had some weird stuff still, and have to
Yeah.
deal with it, unfortunately. And there is this kind of concern about the special tobacco and marijuana force, or whatever they are, from the within the state police.
Yeah.
you need the that big of a deal for. I would like the approach to be more technical, like violation ordinance style, approach. Knock on the door, hey, cut that out, before you have to turn to any other, type of enforcement. Little process of telling people to stop the behavior, and it works. And it's worked in some cities and stuff. It just be a statewide approach and save all that resource, to make criminalization out of the plant, which the point of making a lot of the changes in the laws was to remove the criminality. And all right, come on, Steph. Steph's gonna try to come back in here. Could be just conditions wherever she are changing around her, making the connection more difficult, but the picture looks good. Her name is clear. I can hear some stuff that makes sense.
Can you guys hear me? I can finally hear you guys.
It sounds so clear. So let's just roll with
Yes.
it.
Fantastic.
Perfect,
Fantastic. Fantastic. As my grandfather used to always say, you just have to hold your mouth right. Kids don't. So I was just telling about some resources at Americans for Safe Access to get more information. And our website has we've been historians of the medical cannabis movement. So you can find information about everything that's also we also have been training advocates for years as well. And I think one of the things we're really trying to get across to people is that if you're frustrated by what medical cannabis looks like today, you should know that we're not done. And but we need you to be a part of changing that. You have to be involved. Good things don't just happen because they're right. We'd be living on a different planet if that was the case. And so we really need advocates to to step up and learn how they can get involved. And I think when people say things like adult use will just take care of everyone, I think it's important to just to correct people and say, actually, a lot of people are left out. Look at what some of the states have tried to do to make.
I feel like every time she drops, I just lost the lottery. It's like,
she has such great perseverance, so I'm really happy that her point is to keep at it and get more and more information. And we've recorded some really good stuff. Unfortunately, it's had to be by way of when the connection happens to be good enough, but I'll take that over nothing. It's been really interesting. And I was a pretty big skeptic as soon as I brought it up to a few other people without looking further into it. Similar to me, immediate skepticism. In fact, I went through a process in the state about taking it off our state's controlled substances list. And there was some discussion about creating a new schedule. And it just irked me so much. I didn't even consider it. So the details, ultimately, when you unfold this particular situation, I think you end up, and I think on a federal level, it makes more sense than it does here on the state too. I'm still happy with my rejection of it on the state level, but you get medical marijuana in every state. It might take a little bit, to get some doctors and some places to go along with it, but the road would be paved to prescribe it and bring some products into places to distribute it. I mean, wouldn't be, again, ideal or something, but it would be something that they don't have now. So I'm happy about that. And the fact that it does not interfere at all with just, the adult's right to use cannabis or participate otherwise in, the commercial industry and just, grow and sell it for whatever reason they want, also makes it appealing. And then it is something that, as stated before, there will be a descheduling, but there will be a rescheduling, but they won't take it off. So the compromise to put it into a place where it can make more sense right away also is something that seems to be a really good strategy to me.
Well, it's really
I'm
unique.
back.
It's a unique plan. So
There she is.
No, go ahead, Jim. I want to hear what you have to say. I've been talking a lot. So.
Oh yeah, no, thank you, Steph. Glad you're back. So I was just going to say that it's such a unique plan. I think it kind of deserves its own scheduling in a way, but it is scary that it has its own scheduling at the same time. That they're not going to just kind of write it into it, or actually just descheduled altogether would be my preference.
Yeah, if left alone, some people are, like Richard saying some stuff like, I don't want that, governmental stuff or whatever. There's going to be, it just depends on how it's going to look. This helps to really define things for people that aren't able to make great decisions. I'm also liking it for that reason too.
Yeah, and I think there's, this plan has been very politicized. There's a lot of, baggage around cannabis, but there's also, some realities about, sort of I think people often say, well, alcohol isn't on a schedule and, tobacco isn't on a schedule. And I think that, there's actually a lot of people that wish that it was, right. That those two markets were in existence before, before we had the scheduling system in the 70s, and even before the FDA. But, people may not know this, but, in 2012, actually tobacco, the regulation actually went under the FDA. And that's when we started seeing like the banning of the vape products, and a bunch of the different flavored tobaccos. So, I think that it's unrealistic to think that cannabis will be an unregulated product in this country. It is an intoxicant. It does, there are things that people need to be aware of when using it. I know, there's a lot of advocates out there that think that it's a cure-all and we should just put it in the water. I guess CBD companies have done that. But the truth is that, cannabis, like any other substance, has, some positive components and there are some negative. And, we need to look at like how we want to see, the way that I look at this is from a patient's point of view. I'm not an advocate for adult use. It doesn't mean I don't think people should be able to do whatever they want. I definitely don't think anyone should ever go to jail for nonviolent offenses. But what I'm looking at is, again, how do we push cannabis into a space of medicine? How do we make sure that doctors are educated about the potential of cannabis? How do we, instruct those companies that want to create products for patients? How do we, create a pathway that they can create standardized products and really look at evidence-based protocols to develop those? And how do we get this covered by health insurance? Those are all of the components that, I think that that a lot of people may not be looking at, and it's okay. If you don't care about any of those things, and what you care about is adult use, awesome. Work on adult use. But I think that it's clear that I want people to know, like, I'm not trying to hurt adult use. Patients aren't trying to take away your cannabis. So don't try to take away our pathways. Like, the adult use market is not meeting our,
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't affect that adult use side. If it did, there would be an issue. So, we could through different means we could do this. But like this makes sense given that is definitely the fact here. So
yeah, we're not talking about either or. We're talking about and, right. And I think that what a lot of people, and I really want people to understand, is that when we look at regulating cannabis for adult use and for medical, the regulations surrounding product safety are the same. But then after that, it really looks very different, right? Like how patients get the medicine, the cost, what they're, the quantity that's allowed, all of those things are very different. And I think that, for people with within the adult use component that just say, well, just let the states regulate it, there and then medical will be fine. I also want to point out, there's a lot of life choices that patients have just become accustomed to that really suck. That I don't think a lot of people think about, right? Medical cannabis patients, when they open an invitation for a wedding or graduation, they have to look and see what state it's in to see if that's a possibility that they can even go. If a loved one is in hospice or if there's a funeral, a patient may not be able to travel to that state to say goodbye or to mourn with their family. A lot of patients put off going into hospital when they need to go into a hospital because they know they won't use cannabis in the hospital. A lot of patients have complications in their treatment because when they're in the hospital they can't use medical cannabis for whatever reason they're using it, and adult use isn't going to fix that, right? And so again, we're talking about a different lane, and I also want to point out that adult use has benefited so far from everything we've done in the medical cannabis space. And if we pass a federal bill that creates the Office of Medical Cannabis and Cannabinoids and creates a space to do this research around both medicine and public health, then adult use markets are going to benefit from that. But I will tell you, in Washington is not ready to legalize cannabis for recreational use. And it shouldn't be seen again as an either or competition. And just remember that every person that is legally using cannabis in this country at the state level, they owe that to patient advocates. That I've had the honor of knowing people that their last days of their life they spent protesting or sitting in a courtroom of someone that was being prosecuted. And I feel an obligation, honor of those people that have fought to get us here. But I also, by our organization and our mission, we spend a lot of time looking at all of those people that have been left outside. And I think that one of our biggest obstacles, it's not one of the exercises and one of the workshops that we'll be doing on October 14th and that we did in DC was a workshop on organizing without a clear enemy or a visible crisis. Right. In the early days, the DEA kind of did our work for us. Right. They did the press ops. They showed up and took our medicine. All we had to do is call the media and tell them to look at it. And today, one of the biggest enemies that we have is misinformation. And the other one is complacency. And this idea that, again, once you once you have gotten your cannabis, once you've gotten your legal rights, that you're not holding the door open. And when you don't hold the door open for everyone else, you're actually, it's a slap in the face of the people that held the door open for you. And
Right
so, cannabis has the potential to change the way that we look at medicine. It has the potential to create better quality of life, longer, create longevity, and really look at medicines that are more tailored to individuals. But that's not going to happen unless we continue to advocate for it. And so, a big role of what we do at Americans for Safe Access is spending time, creating tools for people to really understand the legislation. We
Come on back. I guess while we're waiting for the reconnection, the crystal clear reconnection to happen, for clarity and to reiterate, this creates more access. It doesn't make existing programs more restrictive. Just in places where it doesn't go down, it allows it to go down, and it creates a system for how it's handled federally. So that people who are thinking about this can look to something like this as a direction and not have to make a series of bad decisions and have to learn about it by making errors before finally getting something that makes sense. We're still gonna have at it though, and she'll be back on, I'm sure, to talk more. But there's some really good information coming out of this. I'm more and more in support of this approach. I mean, there are some things that aren't ideal, but it's got a beyond just being the ability to get an incremental gain because people feel comfortable keeping it on the list. It has some very positive practical effects that are just really important, and equaling more access to people in places where it doesn't exist right now, more awareness of it as an option. I can't really think of a reason to want to be in the way of that, and nor is there an alternative that has the viability of this. You there, Steph?
I'm here. Sorry, Mom.
It's okay. Yeah,
It's crazy.
Appreciate you persevering. We're getting some good information, and even if we have to go back and forth a little bit, thank you for putting up with
Just
it
think
yourself.
of them dramatic pauses.
Yes, yeah, and in between we kind of recap and reinforce a little bit. So, yeah. So just for clarity, this does not make any other existing program more restrictive at all. It doesn't go backwards. It just creates more access for people.
That's right.
And that's what Americans for Safe Access does. You have an appreciation for an adult use program in some places if that's what they have, because that's getting cannabis to patients ultimately. I mean, just to recognize access where it exists, and more of it, the better. Steph, are you still with us? All right, might be working on a little reconnect, but want to get a little bit more into the components maybe of the Schedule 6 that she didn't cover yet. And then also, particularly since Jim is here, talk a little bit more too about how all MTO plants kind of fit into that, philosophy. And if, ASA might have it on the mind, on the horizon to, because of the medical benefits, the health benefits, to incorporate that more formally into like what they do in the future. It would kind of make sense, I think.
I think it does. Yeah.
So let me see here. Rich says he can hear the clock. That's actually like one of those, it's like a solar powered, like waving Chinese cat that's making that noise. It's up on the windowsill. It's pretty cool. I'm so used to it now that. Yeah. So, I mean, was it somebody asking amidst our group here about how it affects caregivers? Is that right? How this federally would
Anna's
affect
really
caregivers?
excited over here, so we're on mute. I said Anna's really excited over here, so we're on mute. This is the happiest I've ever seen a kid around me.
I'm glad that she's happy.
She thinks that will affect caregivers in other states or that program altogether. Like, I'd like to hear her insight on that.
Yeah, it shouldn't, but I'd like her to talk about that. Michigan did it, and there have been some other versions of it too. But
I was going to say it's just. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say that it's just important that we remember to remind lawmakers and when the changing of the guard comes in, whether it be locally or federally, about cannabis. One of the things that she was saying before she dropped was that about complacency and about not being complacent, and that is the complacency in not reminding lawmakers, especially the new ones, the benefits of cannabis.
Yeah, the ones that don't have historical perspective, particularly. We saw how we get into trouble with that last session, and everybody here had a hand in working against some bad legislation. So, exactly.
For sure.
Steph, are you there?
I am here. I am.
Awesome. So,
It's me.
the effect potentially of Schedule 6 on something like the caregiver component of our medical program, if there'd be any change to just the direct distribution to a small number of people in a direct relationship for medicine like that, people are wondering about.
I missed the first part of
Well,
your
so
question.
a caregiver that works directly with patients, if anything
Mhm.
about the federal change to Schedule 6 about that relationship or the way that medicine they would have to do anything with the medicine, any other standard, anything different than what that relationship is now, if there'd be any effect from Schedule 6 on the state caregiver programs.
No, there would not be. And actually the law specifically specifies and Schedule 6 specifies that it does not prohibit home cultivation. And so basically if that is allowed in the state, then that would be allowed to continue.
And I think in general, ACE is careful about making anything that already exists restrictive or prohibitive. If it already exists, helping to get cannabis out, it's something that they don't typically want to interfere with. So I've noticed.
Yes, yeah. We definitely take into account sort of all of, we want to build on what we've learned, not tear it down. And I think that, with adult use programs in place, I feel like it's this opportunity where we can say, okay, great, like let's talk about patients now, right? Because I think that even in the early days of medical cannabis, there were a lot of folks that and a lot of people that wanted to try to fit everything into medical that maybe wasn't, and so for those people who are using cannabis as a a life enhancement, then that's great. I'm glad that is an option. But just I think it's important to realize that there are other types of consumers, and that we're not talking about those programs when we talk about allowing medical to evolve.
Yeah. Making sure we don't lose sight of it, and it's been a concern, for a lot of people. And I didn't have it as much, to be quite honest with you. And I'm starting to see the perspective now of why it is. So I really appreciate all this information.
Of course. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah. So I just Jim is here. I don't want to cut you off. You can feel free to say what you want to say, but and he does a lot of work in the state, has initiated a lot of the policy changes locally, and working for statewide stuff for entheogenic plants at large, psilocybin and other things. And we were just wondering if it would sort of follow, particularly since there is the the health and other benefits, from such a thing, similar to, it works differently and it's a different thing, but similar to cannabis and being a plant and being healthy and relatively safe and so forth. If ASA potentially would expand into incorporating other plant medicines.
Well, I think that we definitely keep other medicines in mind. For now, we have a pretty big mission that we are still trying to accomplish. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind, for instance, with psilocybin, a lot of those advocates have wanted to stay very separate from cannabis, because they don't have the same issues as cannabis. Actually, the psilocybin, as far as like research, you can make psilocybin in a lab. So they didn't have all of these extra barriers for research that we've had for cannabis, and the pathway. So, we're going to see, medicines. Same thing is true with MDMA, right? Like MDMA research, move forward faster because they could just make it in a lab. They didn't have to go through all of these hurdles. And we also want to, be careful that we're not, setting precedent that is going to make, it harder for people to have access. They have the wellness products right now. And so, I think, those are things we have to keep in mind. And I think that, there's still a lot of work to do on medical. So we have a lot of allies in those communities, in the various plant medicines. We definitely, make sure that what we're doing isn't
Man,
I imagine what you're saying is that what they're doing isn't taking away from their direct mission, which is for
there's
cannabis.
so much to do with cannabis still, that all those things
Yeah.
would make sense to line up. That would be an additional focus right now.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and that makes sense to me too. I think though that, psilocybin and those things, MDMA, all have a little head start, I guess, because of their acceptance.
The pathway. Yeah. Is
Yeah.
The concept of, kind of a safer plant medicine that's beneficial is out there, and they do benefit from the work that ACE has done on cannabis, let's say,
Totally. But definitely there should be partnerships and just support along the way, from both sides. The psilocybin.
Right, yeah.
And
No, I agree. I agree. And that's one of the, yeah, I agree. That was focus. You guys, as Entheo Fest organizers and, people who wanted to have this type of gathering and that kind of stuff, you took those things into consideration. And, at the Diag, where the Hash Bash takes place. But in September this year, the 17th.
The 17th. Yeah.
Which is a Sunday, starting at 1:11, the Entheo Fest on the Diag will take place, and the other plant medicines in addition to cannabis are celebrated, discussed,
Some great
used. And that'll be very cool. And see if John will come out this year.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Love to have John there. Wow. They're apparently doing construction work on the steps of Hatcher Library, and it's planned to be completed, I guess, by the end of August. So the fest should be fun, but I wonder what it's going to look like and if it'll be very different.
We'll have to wait to see.
I know. I'm just throwing it out there.
I imagine they don't do too many like huge changes.
You're gonna have to
Just
put some pictures up, Jim, so we can see it.
a newer, better version
Yeah,
of
when I
what
see it,
was
yeah.
there, probably.
Well, maybe a little special little area you can smoke back there. Maybe set up for people. For half
Yeah, they're going to take that into consideration, especially the people we talked to, a couple months ago.
Adam would love it.
Oh man, Adam wanted to be on that meeting really bad. That would have been funny. Not productive, but pretty funny. I hope Steph can come back on for some final thoughts, but there is a lot of great information that was brought up on here. I'm a little bit more excited about it. I think it's important though, like addressing somebody, so many people, you just when I begin hearing it, I'll own it, myself, Rick, for example, if he was a little bit more up for it, he was going to come on and listen or participate a little bit because he had some concerns. I don't know if they'll be resolved if he learns what I learned or not. I have no idea. It'll be an ongoing discussion for a little bit. There's probably some more details that we could learn about too. I brought it up to Dr. Crocker, who is a cannabis focused medical doctor. And he was going to come on today, but he couldn't make it. And find out what his perspective is. But when I first brought it up to him, he's like, "Oh, I don't like it on the schedule." First reaction a lot of people have. So I think in discussing it preemptively to tell people that it gets its own definition, it doesn't interfere with it does take it off Schedule 1, doesn't interfere with adult use programs in states or potential federal regulatory schemes for interstate trade or international trade or whatever too. So those are important, and I really like the idea that it gets cannabis into places where it is not currently allowed. That alone right there is a great move. It's ingenious, really, and ACE has done a lot of really cool moves like that over the years. So I was talking about earlier, suing, getting a lawsuit with the DEA for scheduling, and even though it didn't work, a lot of great information for a lot of people was put on the record through those processes. Steph, you there for a final thought as we're kind of winding down a little bit? She will be. It's close. You can hear it trying to pierce through the audio veil. That's its own discussion. Paul Youngsworth's an attorney, so aware of these discussions, and I think that has to do with what the FDA could potentially do. Again, though, I have a hard time believing that causes a real issue maybe from like really having a much better medical scenario as Schedule 6 might provide, but I don't think it eliminates or really, as some people will argue, causes issues for the other programs that some states are putting forward. Schedule 1 now, it's a lower schedule. To think that we would then now be in more jeopardy or something, or have more consequences, shouldn't make sense. But then again, we're not a straightforward black and white, what's better for most type of a, government right now. So many things are possible, and people should be concerned with negative consequences whenever the government's involved. All right, Steph.
Come on, Steph.
This is going to connect. It's going to work. Some final words of wisdom.
Hey, Jamie, can you hear me?
It is trying. Yes, so well. Final
Nice,
words of
nice.
wisdom.
Final words of wisdom is that this software takes up a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah, I know. We
and
should have maybe
actually
done it for
it's
Zoom
over.
for you today.
Yeah, no worries. It overheated my laptop with you, Jamie, and your listeners. I'm happy to come back anytime to answer more questions. And I just encourage everybody to check out our website, get involved, and hopefully I will see all of you in October 14th in Detroit for the ASA Advocacy Academy. And remember, just because you have access to cannabis doesn't mean everyone does. And make sure to honor those people that have the door open for you, holding the door open for everyone. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Steph. A lot of great information, and we will have you back on. We'll maybe do it live closer to the time of the event in October, or something else comes up. And really, really appreciate this information. And it did help to give me much better perspective. I hope it does for others too.
Well,
and I'll be
thanks.
able to continue to talk about it, knowing more
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having me.
Right.
Stacy, Jim, so great to see you. And it's so great to meet you guys, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Steph. We'll
Bye,
definitely
all.
be talking soon. See you.
Bye, Steph.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. So I'm really happy about that. And obviously, wish that the connection would have been stronger, better. We could have seen her, the whole thing, but really good information. I've been curious about it. One thing she did say that I do want to know just a little bit more about to make sure the distinction can easily be made. And that is, there's another Schedule 6 effort in existence, but that one does not take cannabis off of Schedule 1 otherwise for adult use or any other purposes. So it essentially makes an exclusion. We have a weird double thing in Michigan too, where it's on Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 as specifically medical grade, pharmaceutical grade cannabis on Schedule 2 and just cannabis on Schedule 1. So all that stuff is kind of stupid. If you take it off Schedule 1, you make the special definition for Schedule 6. We have a practical approach and kind of a very smart strategy, in my opinion, right now. So we'll have to keep up on that and see how that plays out. But, Trish, you and Tanya, I know, took a lot in today, learned about this along with a lot of us. And this has a lot of interest. So if you want to get a couple last words in, what you thought about it or about anything else, as we wind down.
No, there's a lot of things in my mind, I guess, to look over into it, but I did learn quite a bit, and I'm really excited. Actually, I'm going through their blogs right now that she talked about on their website. So I don't know, I'm really high. I just sat here and listened and get really high. So I don't really have much to say, guys.
Well, good enough. That's it's good information. If you sat there and absorbed it, then that had some
no,
that's some good value. We're going to talk about this more.
Like reading stuff. She's talking on the website too as well. So it's just kind of in and out with everything. So,
No problem.
I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting too, just kind of look into the fact that we use Israel.
Oh shit! I was going to bring up Philip Morris. Just bought a big Israel company.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
They just bought the largest cannabis research company, medical company in Israel. So I'm kind of, where are we going to get our standards from then? To start
that inevitable, participation by the huge money interest.
And pass it out the door. I don't know. It's interesting that they would choose to be a medical cannabis researcher and sell it to like a cigarette company. But that's the world we live in. So
they got some big.
Don't they make vape pens too? Isn't it a vape pen?
I think they developed the technology.
It's an inhaler cartridge, basically, that measures exact amounts.
The dosing, exactly.
The smokeless cigarette. That was $1 billion research effort by tobacco companies. They probably created the technology for vaping. But they're going to get in early and often, and to like have control over medical, and we're talking about scheduling and all that kind of stuff, you get scared about what type of influence they're going to have, how they're going to want to have things end up to best benefit themselves. Just like we've had issue with big money interest here. This is not big money interest anymore. This is like amidst like the hugest of players that could come into the game. There's a couple of them like that. How many brands and companies and things under this umbrella? It's ridiculous. So we knew it was inevitable. So and here it gets started. We can still be involved though, and help to stop some really stupid overtaking of things. So, Jim, anything you want to get in before we wrap it up?
No, but other than the Senate bill, was it 661 that allowed for Canadian pharmacy companies to come down if
I think just 660. I think it's just 660.
660 was it? Okay.
Yeah.
But that's what I thought about today a little bit when we were talking about all this. And
it's not gonna matter though. It won't. I mean, some people have still talked about it, but Senate Bill 660, I want to say 4 or 5 sessions ago, it did pass. It was for pharmaceutical. That's where the pharmaceutical grade cannabis came on to Schedule 2 via that bill. That change did happen. Otherwise, it doesn't go into effect unless there's federal rescheduling off of Schedule 1. So yes, this would trigger that. But what it would do is create the ability for some companies to grow medical grade, pharmaceutical grade cannabis, and to either ship it out or have cannabis pharmacies distribute it. So it does create another program upon federal rescheduling, but it's not a competitive program. I mean, somebody could try it. Maybe there's a niche with it, but it's not going to do anything. It's not going to alter, much. And I doubt anybody even really tries to utilize it. But we'll see. Maybe there's an angle somebody figures out. I don't think it's going to hurt.
I do remember it being separate. You couldn't be in the medical, the
you had to choose. You had to choose.
And that program, according to
You had to choose, and originally it was just being sent to you by mail. Then the revisions had like the special medical pharmacies and stuff. So,
but anyway,
it was a Canadian company that was going to grow in an abandoned copper mine in the UP, and they were going to send all the cannabis out from there to everybody. So I don't think that's going to. I mean, it might go into effect, but I don't think it's actually going to be competitive. Stacy, want to get some final words in? Thanks for being here too. In fact, everybody's been really supportive and helping out. I really miss Rick a lot. Used to have him around whenever I do something like this. But Stacy, any final thoughts? I'm muted again. There you go.
Oh, okay, there we go. No, I definitely I do miss Rick closing out the show. Jamie, you've done amazing. Everybody's doing a great job. But I definitely miss that too. Wanted to get that out there. But no, I mean, Legacy Fest was amazing. It was great to hear Steph, in and out, of course, but really explain more of what Schedule 6 is. I learned a little bit about it when I was in DC, but there's still a lot more to learn. And a lot of questions get brought up, but Steph generally kind of has some pretty damn good answers for each one of them. So I'm excited for a visit in October, and look forward to the next episode of Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Thanks for having me in.
Well, I appreciate it, and we'll talk about this more with Dr. Crocker, maybe some other medical doctors, see how they think it could play out from their perspective, people who do this stuff on a regular basis. There's just a lot more to delve into, and we'll just stay up on it and definitely get with Steph when she comes back into town. Again, I just want to remind people, give some recognition and some thoughts to Steve Lovinger, Search Warrant Steve. Too many members of the community we have to discuss like this, but he definitely deserves some attention. And maybe we'll hear from Brandy and Adam and others who are at his services next week. And continue to send prayers, positive vibes, and well wishes, and anything to Rick. His address is out there for sending cards and stuff. I don't have it with me. People want it, just let me know, or look at some old posts or something like that. And he still loves getting cards, and hearing from people and knowing that they're out there supporting them. It does help them out a lot. So, all right, everybody. Jazz Cabbage Cafe, another good one. And we'll be back again next week, and appreciate everybody. Thanks a lot.
Night, everybody.